For decades, the reflex when confronting Adolf Hitler has been to apply a single, absolute label: evil. But that label often functions as a psychological trap. It frames the most destructive figure in modern history as an incomprehensible phantom, obscuring the human processes that actually allowed him to reach the chancellery. Understanding this catastrophe requires tracking two separate trajectories: the internal chaos of a fractured mind and the volatile emotional climate of the nation that mind would eventually consume. This analysis is not an attempt to excuse these crimes or mitigate his responsibility for mass murder. It is an autopsy of how a disaster of this scale is constructed. Preventing a repeat of this history begins with discarding the comfort of the monster myth and examining the predictable sequence of pathology and social manipulation that produces a dictator. Hitler's development was anchored in a volatile childhood household. He was raised by a submissive mother and a father who used physical abuse and rigid authority as his primary modes of interaction. This specific environment fractured his ability to form stable attachments. It fostered a personality structure defined by alienation, high impulsivity, and severe aggressive tendencies. Modern psychiatric assessments based on these behaviors show a clear alignment with several clinical disorders. This research points to a combination of post-traumatic stress disorder and schizophrenia paranoid type, a condition characterized by intense persecutory delusions and a distorted sense of grandiosity. These latent conditions hit a breaking point in 1918. While hospitalized for a mustard gas attack at Pasewalk, Hitler experienced a psychological collapse that he reinterpreted as a vision from God, convincing him he was divinely chosen to save Germany. He emerged from the war as a deeply disturbed individual. To stabilize his own internal psychological chaos, he began projecting his fears onto a massive external enemy. At the same time, the German public was submerged in a volatile emotional climate of unacknowledged shame. The defeat in World War I and the subsequent Treaty of Versailles did more than just drain the economy. They crushed German national pride, leaving millions of citizens feeling profoundly humiliated on the world stage. This national humiliation aligned with Hitler's own deep-seated failures. Before the war, he had been rejected as an artist by the Vienna elite, an experience that left him with a lifelong resentment toward what he considered degenerate cultural influences. His identity as a wounded, defeated soldier mirrored the wounded ego of the struggling German populace. They were both searching for a way to recover a lost sense of status. When a nation paralyzed by collective shame meets an individual driven by psychotic humiliation, the result is a catastrophic ideological synchronization. The catalyst that transforms passive, internalized shame into active, outward violence is a combination of moral shock and blame. Because Hitler could not accept personal failure and Germany could not accept military defeat, they both required a scapegoat to absolve them of fault. The Nazi regime provided that scapegoat by launching a paranoia conspiracy theory. They systematically blamed the Jewish population for every source of national anxiety, from military sabotage to alleged cultural decline. This was redemptive anti-Semitism, a framework that reinterpreted the persecution of a minority as a heroic, necessary path toward restoring national honor. This weaponization of blame allowed Hitler to harness a nation's psychological vulnerability and forge it into a unified, aggressive political movement. This manipulation of emotion quickly evolved into rigid, systemic legal structures. The Nuremberg laws utilized racial pseudoscience to strictly define and target the population. They replaced religious and cultural identity with legally mandated biological categories designed to isolate and dehumanize. To construct this hierarchy, German legislators looked toward the United States, drawing direct inspiration from Jim Crow segregation and existing anti-miscegenation laws. The Holocaust was the physical result of untreated psychopathology and weaponized shame being encoded into the industrialized machinery of a government. Totalitarian movements are forged when a deeply disturbed individual successfully exploits a vulnerable public emotional climate. The warning signs are identifiable: the presence of psychopathic leadership traits merged with rhetoric that manipulates unacknowledged national humiliation. Identifying these patterns allows society to dismantle xenophobic and identitarian movements before they can gather institutional power. Replacing the myth of evil with a rigorous understanding of these psychological and social mechanics is our best defense against the repetition of mass atrocity.